And this senator is going to continue to stand up and fight to ensure that they are a part of that deficit reduction package. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
What's pending business before the Senate?
The Petraeus nomination. The senator from Arizona is recognized.
And, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to engage in a colloquy with the senator from South Carolina.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in a few minutes we will be casting, I'm sure, a 100-0 vote to confirm General David Petraeus as the new director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and obviously his nomination is supported by all members of the Senate, and I'm sure all Americans, especially those like the senator from South Carolina and myself, who have had the great privilege and honor of knowing General Petraeus for many years and watching him lead the men and women serving in our military in a fashion that I have never seen surpassed. The senator from South Carolina has had the unique privilege and responsibility to serve under General Petraeus in uniform, because as most of our colleagues know, the senator from South Carolina also serves as a colonel in the South Carolina National Guard and in the legal corps as a JAG officer. And the senator from South Carolina has worked with General Petraeus both in Iraq and Afghanistan on many of the important issues concerning detainees as well as other issues. And before I ask the senator from South Carolina for his comments, I would like to repeat what I said before. I don't believe that in my life, which has been blessed to know many outstanding military leaders of all branches of the service, that I have ever quite encountered a military leader, or a civilian leader for that matter, with the combination of charisma and intellect that General Petraeus possesses. The senator from South Carolina and I, and the senator from Connecticut, Senator Lieberman, and I had the unique opportunity among many visits that we've made to Iraq and Afghanistan, to one 4th of July in 2007, to be present at a re-enlistment ceremony that took place in the palace in Baghdad. There was a couple of thousand spectators, and there was well over 200 young men and women who had agreed to re-enlist, to continue to serve in Iraq when they could have fulfilled their commitment that they made to service in the military and gone home to their families and a grateful nation. Instead, they chose to re-enlist, to stay and continue the fight. At that same ceremony, there was part of that ceremony was to administer the oath of citizenship to over 75 people who were not born in the United States of America, who were not citizens, who were green card holders, who were legally in the United States as green card holders, but had joined the military in order to serve and to achieve an accelerated path to citizenship. What struck me at that ceremony was that in the front row there were 3 empty seats with boots on them of individuals who were green card holders who were scheduled to take the oath of citizenship and who had been killed in the previous few days in action serving their country in Iraq. I was privileged to speak. Senator from South Carolina spoke. Senator from Connecticut spoke. But when General David Petraeus spoke to those assembled men and women who are serving their country, it was very obvious of the not only respect but adoration that every one of those young Americans felt for the inspirational leadership that General Petraeus had provided them. And I might point out that it was a time when most experts and many politicians and members of this body predicted that the surge would fail. Well, I think what they didn't take into account was the incredible leadership and implementation of a strategy that was embodied by General David Petraeus and the young men and women who are serving. So I am confident that as we continue the fight against al-Qaeda and the radical Islamic extremists that want to attack and destroy our country, that General David Petraeus, now Director of the CIA, soon to be Director of the CIA, will provide our nation with the very best strategy, tactics, and thought and action to keep our nation safe. So I don't very often, Mr. President, come and talk about nominees and spend the Senate's time, but I know that I express the appreciation and affection of all those men and women, both serving now and in the past, who had the great honor and privilege of serving under General Petraeus, and to wish him well done and smooth sailing and following winds as he assumes his new responsibilities, which will continue to keep America safe.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
Well, I just want to echo what Senator McCain said. I think our American military will be studying the Petraeus tactics and strategy that he implemented in Iraq and Afghanistan for generations to come. In January 2007, when the surge was announced, I had the pleasure of being over in Iraq in April. But I remember a letter issued by General Petraeus to all those under his command, and it was basically entitled, "Hard is not hopeless." He explained in great detail in a letter how we would move forward as a nation, that it would be difficult, it would be hard, but it is not hopeless. And I have seen the inspiration he provides to our men and women in uniform, and I cannot tell you how much this country owes General Petraeus and his family. He's been deployed almost continuously since 2001. But what he was able to accomplish in Iraq with the help of those under his command, and he'll be the first to say they deserve the credit. And now Afghanistan. He came into Afghanistan under very difficult circumstances, losing a commander in the field, and the progress in the last year has been stunning. The Taliban in the south have really been knocked down hard. There's a 90,000 increase in the Afghan National Security Forces. We have a new training program to train Afghan security forces that I think will pay great dividends. And to the President, you have chosen wisely in picking Dave Petraeus to be the Director of the CIA. I am confident that Director Petraeus will do as good a job for the country as General Petraeus, and that is saying a lot. Following Leon Panetta, who did a great job, we're in good hands as a nation. I don't believe any single person understands the threats America faces better than General Petraeus. And at the CIA, he'll have a chance to take the fight to the enemy in a different way. We will not have available forever 100,000 troops to be used in theaters of battle. We're going to bring our troops home in Iraq and Afghanistan. I hope we do it smartly based on conditions. But this fight is morphing into other countries, Yemen, Somalia, the Horn of Africa, and the CIA is playing a more crucial role in our nation's defense than any time in the history of the CIA. So we will be blessed to have Dave Petraeus to be Director of the CIA. He understands the threats. I think he'll be able to marshal the resources of the CIA to keep the enemy on their heels and to reinforce to our allies that we're a reliable partner, and to our enemies, there's no place you can hide, there's no passage of time that will keep you safe from American justice. I hope the Congress, I know Senator Chambliss will, the Senate in particular, will listen to General Petraeus, who will soon be Director Petraeus, about how to make sure the CIA is equipped and funded to take the enemy on. In this war on terror, we're fighting an idea. There's no capital to conquer. There's no Air Force to shoot down. There's no Navy to sink. We're battling an idea. And the way we ultimately become safe is to empower those who have the will to fight the terrorists in their backyard, to provide them with the capacity, to let the terrorist organizations know that we will follow you to the gates of hell, that we will never relent. And the CIA and the brave men and women who serve in that organization are becoming the tip of the spear in this battle. What happened in Somalia yesterday, what's going to happen in the future in Yemen and Somalia is direct result of good intelligence and national will. So to Senator McCain and those who have got to know General Petraeus, I can assure you that President Obama chose wisely. This is the perfect job for Dave Petraeus to take up for the nation. He has the understanding of the threats that we face, and the CIA is the platform we'll be using against the enemy more effectively than any other platform I know. So with that, I look forward to casting my vote for Director of the CIA, Dave Petraeus, and I hope everybody in this body will provide a vote of confidence to General Petraeus. He's earned this. America's in good hands with Dave Petraeus being the CIA Director. With that, I yield.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Sure. Without objection. Under the previous order, the question is on the Petraeus nomination. There appears sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Thank you.
Grassley, aye.
Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell.
I don't see anything in there that has anything about DOD reimbursing costs. I don't know why they would ask for it. They need
Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper.
I
Mr.
didn't see
Casey.
anything on the face of the bill that looked like that.
Mr. Chambliss.
They reported that without a minute.
Mr. Coates.
I checked that chat. I thought the same thing, and then I'm totally lost. That don't need anything. But I
Mr. Coburn.
I was like, question?
Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham,
Thank you.
Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller,
What is this vote?
Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Noe, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Carey, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska,
But Harry, thank you a million.
Mr. Nelson of
An
Florida,
hour, okay? 1 hour. Yes.
Sorry.
Is he crying? I'm signing on to you.
Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman,
Increased time bill for school.
Mr. Pryor,
Extended education. Great.
Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Senators voting in the affirmative: Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Brown of Ohio, Casey, Chambliss, Coburn, Cornyn, Feinstein, Graham, Grassley, Isaacson, Johans, Lieberman, McCain, McCaskill, Nelson, Nebraska, Reed of Nevada, Rubio, Sanders, Shelby, Snow, Tester, Vitter, and Warner. No senator voted in the negative. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Beckidge, aye. Mr. Roberts, aye. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Inouye, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Heller, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Hatch, aye. Mr. Lugar, aye. Mr. Sessions, aye.
Proceed S679.
Mr. Wicker, aye.
Order. Written on my sheet of paper.
Mr. Corker.
Talk to anybody about it?
Mr. Corker, aye. Mrs. Hutchison, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Enzi, aye. Mr. Franken, aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mr. Kyle, aye. Mr. Kirk, aye. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Coons, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Ms. Ayotte, aye. Mr. Harkin, aye.
Mr. Blunt votes aye.
Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Coates, aye. Kaka, aye. Mr. Cochran, aye. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Carey, aye. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, aye. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Webb, aye. Mr. Dement, aye. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Udall? Mr. Udall, Colorado, aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Thune? Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Levin? Mr. Levin, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Conrad, aye. Mr. Pryor, aye. Mr. Merkley? Aye. Ms. Stabenow? Ms. Stabenow? Aye. Mr. Schumer? Aye.
Senators who wish to, who have not yet voted or wish to change their vote. Are there any senators who have not yet voted or wish to change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 94, the nays are 0, and the nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. The President will be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate will resume legislative session.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent this Finance Committee be authorized to meet today at 3 p.m.
Is there objection? Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, July 5th, the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 88, SJ Res 20, a joint resolution authorizing the limited use of the United States Armed Forces in support of the NATO mission in Libya.
This is a very important issue, and I understand that a number of my colleagues have worked very hard to bring this issue to the floor. But the fact of the matter is it simply doesn't address the fact that we're bankrupting this nation. So, Mr. President, I do object.
Objection is heard.
No tabs of quorum. No, there will be no, Mr. President, prior to the chair calling for the quorum. There will be, I've conferred with my friend, the Republican leader, and there will be no more votes today or tomorrow. My first vote will be next Tuesday. Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
Yes.
I ask consent that be terminated.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to proceed to a period of morning business for debate only until 6 p.m. tonight. The Senator is permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each during that period of time.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I regret that our colleagues have objected to consent to go to some of the most critical issues the country is facing, to have the Finance Committee meet on trade agreements that could expand markets and ultimately create jobs here in America, and that's what we need in America, is creating jobs. That on the question of whether there should be a limited use of force, that the Congress and particularly the Senate should speak, and not being able to do that is pretty amazing to me. And so I hear a lot about wanting to get the people's work done, but then I hear objections to trying to move to get the people's work done. It's pretty outrageous. Mr. President, I came originally to the floor after this vote to thank President Obama for yesterday calling and echoing my call to end subsidies for big oil. It's a call that received a bipartisan vote here in the Senate, a bipartisan majority vote here in the Senate, but of course did not pass because of our colleagues' insistence on a filibuster or a supermajority amount.
But it's time that our friends on the other side of the aisle put the interests of taxpayers ahead of big oil and allow these wasteful subsidies to finally end. As the President said, we have strategies to reduce the deficit, like my legislation to cut oil subsidies that are already introduced and ready to go. And all we have to do is pass it. And a vote to allow that to happen is a simple choice for everyone in this chamber. Are you on the side of working-class families and seniors, or are you on the side of big oil? Now, there are lots of ways to cut the deficit, but saving taxpayer subsidies for big oil while ending Medicare as we know it and cutting student loans is not, in my mind, a solution. It makes no sense, Mr. President, to give a taxpayer-funded subsidy to the big five oil companies earning $12 billion in profits a month. They're going to earn about $144 billion in profits this year alone, and say to families, oh no, you have to sacrifice even more. Now, those on the other side of the aisle would tell a middle-class student whose family earns a medium family income of about a little over $50,000 that, no, you can't go to college, you can't get a Pell Grant from the federal government, but ExxonMobil, a company that will earn $42.6 billion in profits this year, needs government assistance. And they will continue to come to this floor, look America in the eye, and say that that somehow is common sense deficit reduction. Mr. President, there simply is no common sense explanation for balancing the budget on the backs of working families and letting multi-billion-dollar oil companies keep billions in taxpayer dollars. So we have this debate about the deficit and how we deal with the debt ceiling, but we don't seem to want to have the shared sacrifice of having the special interests in this country, whether it's big oil or ethanol, which had a huge bipartisan vote here in the Senate, that they should not face any consequences, but that, in fact, middle-class working families should. We all know that oil companies are among the largest, most profitable countries in the world, but somehow it's hard to understand the scale of their wealth. And I think this chart shows it very clearly. Here's our choices. This is the median income for families in this country. This is big oil's profits. Whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? And, you know, this is about closing loopholes, which, given the current budget climate, you would think that we're all for closing those loopholes. Let me just give you one example of what one of those loopholes are. Under the law, as it exists today, we allow the big five oil companies to go to other countries in the world to say to them, tax us in a way that we can take that and ultimately reduce our obligations here in the U.S. So since U.S. taxpayers are taxed on their income worldwide, but are entitled for a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for any income they have paid to a foreign government, which makes sense because you don't want to tax our companies twice, but U.S. oil and gas companies have very smart lawyers and accountants, and they figured out that if you go to a foreign government like Indonesia and you say to them, don't charge me a license fee, don't charge me a royalty, which is what we do here in the United States to permit these companies to explore on federal lands and waters for oil and gas, we charge them a royalty. No, they say to Indonesia and other countries, charge me a tax. Why? Because then I can take all of that tax, which really is a license fee, but now paid as a tax, and I can deduct it back here in the United States. So what does that mean, Mr. President? That means that American taxpayers are subsidizing foreign oil production. That's not in the national interest of the United States. It is not in the interest of taxpayers in the United States, and it isn't about shared sacrifice when we are talking about how to deal with deficit and debt in this country. And just closing that loophole would close $6.5 billion to the Treasury that could be put directly to deficit reduction. As a matter of fact, I'm only talking about closing 2 loopholes for the big 5 oil companies who are going to make $144 billion in profit. Just closing those 2 loopholes would save the U.S. taxpayer $21 billion over the next 10 years. Now, some of my friends on the other side of the aisle, they say, oh, well, if you do that to those poor oil companies, they're just going to raise the price of gasoline. And that simply isn't true. First of all, we're talking about $21 billion over 10 years, or roughly $2 billion a year. So those poor oil companies, if they'd only make $142 billion in profits this year, instead of $144 billion in profits this year, would not have to raise gas prices, because they're making $142 billion a year, so they certainly don't need to raise gas prices. And we certainly don't need to incentivize their exploration, because they're making record profits in this country and in the world. They don't need us to incentivize them when they're making $144 billion in profits. So let's save the taxpayers that $21 billion. Let's put it directly to deficit reduction. And only in Washington would my Republican friends suggest that stopping those subsidies to big oil is somehow going to be a tax increase. Only in Washington could ending $21 billion in subsidies to the big 5 oil companies — we're not even talking about the independents, who are going to make $144 billion in profits this year — that somehow is a tax increase. Yet we'll take away Pell Grants or dramatically reduce them. We'll cut seniors on the Medicare, the poor under Medicaid, and that's okay. Well, something is wrong with that vision of America. And just to back up my point that the argument is simply fallacious, you need to look no further than the definitive report by the Congressional Research Service that explains that my proposal to end oil subsidies will not lower the production of oil and will not raise gasoline prices. So, Mr. President, you drive up to the pump, you're paying nearly $4 a gallon already, has a real impact on your family, has a real impact on your income, has a real impact on your choices, has a real impact on food prices, has a real impact in so many ways, and yet we're still supposed to give the oil companies another $21 billion in tax breaks by the American taxpayer. It's time to stand up for the people's interests, not the special interests. It's time to end these tax breaks. It's time to put it as a revenue source into our challenges in terms of meeting our debt and dealing with our deficit. And our proposal would do exactly that. I don't know how you can look at the American people and look them in the eye and say, we're going to cut so many things that are going to affect your life, but on this issue, we're going to keep big oil whole. We're going to not touch a penny from their pockets. That's fundamentally wrong, and the American people know it. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to enter into a colloquy with my Republican colleagues for up to 30 minutes.